Thank you, Rabbi Pinny. Thank you, Rabbi Schneur. I think we just saw in front of our eyes one of the most empowering principles of Hasidus come to life. It's an idea in Hasidus that the Rebbe elucidated numerous times, namely that very often the more important the issue, the more important the conversation, the more important the act, the greater the opposition from the other side, as it were. And this is actually one of the most transformative ideas in day-to-day life, because it's very often, precisely when we muster the courage and the imagination and the effort to take that step forward in our journey of Hasidus and Yiddishkeit in general, that we encounter sometimes, maybe even oftentimes, our greatest struggles. And so the Rebbe would teach, of course, that the greater the struggle, the greater the indication that here lies tremendous hidden light and spiritual yield. So I want to begin by sharing a few clips throughout the talk to highlight certain themes that we're going to address tonight. I'm going to share the screen. I got it. I'm okay. Okay. Is it good? You can see?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
So I bought a Greyhound bus ticket for $100 and I went off to look for America. I went around the States meeting many, many rabbis of all kinds. And eventually I got to see the Rebbe in a meeting that changed my life. I asked the Rebbe my questions, the questions of a young sophomore student. He got through them quite rapidly, and that was the extraordinary moment when he suddenly did a role reversal. My questions ended, and his questions began. How many Jewish students were there at Cambridge? How many came along to the Jewish Society? We estimated in those days that we were losing 90% of our Jewish students. We're just drifting away. And the Rebbe started saying, and what are you doing about it? And I really didn't expect this because I never saw myself as a leader or somebody involved in, as it were, reaching out. And I suddenly realized the Rebbe was challenging me to go and lead.
Sie wird angerufen, Treffet. Der Fall, was innewenig kriegen, a Wohnung, Tevis und Margolies, sie liegt ab Mai im Chai. Sie liegen kamo Eitzes, was sie seine Gonus bemawe ho Adomo.
The Rebbe taught me something very important, that the most transformative moments in your life happen when somebody else believes in you more than you believe in yourself.
Last night at London, Jonathan Sachs became the new chief rabbi, a figurehead for the whole of Anglo Jewry, and one of the most influential rabbis in the world.
Okay. Okay, dear friends, I think that's a very appropriate introduction, and soon throughout the talk, I'm going to hopefully unpack that intro. But let me begin with a joke, a lighthearted story, the story of two men who meet on the street. One of them says to his friend, Rappaport, you changed so much. Look at you. You lost weight. You got a facelift. You got a hair transplant. I wouldn't have known it's you. The other fellow says, I'm not Rappaport. The first guy says, look at that, you even changed your name. Friends, when you hear the word bias, what comes to mind? Do you think negative? Do you think neutral? Let me ask you another question. Would you say as a parent that you are biased towards your child? And if so, in what way? And is that a good thing Or is it a bad thing? Or is it a neutral thing? If you're biased towards your child, is it something you need to work to transcend, to uproot? Let me ask you another question. Are you biased towards yourself? And if so, how? And if you're positively biased towards yourself, is that a good thing? Or should you seek to transcend that bias? I share the above with you as a way of bringing you right into the heart of the subject matter of tonight's discussion. Because to my mind, a bias simply means a predisposition and is not in and of itself negative. In fact, as we will soon see, a bias can be something that is cultivated conscientiously and curated to better serve ourselves, our interests, and that of our family and surroundings. A story. During a yechidus, a private audience with the Rebbe, a bureau chief named Charlie Roth extolled his periodical, and he says, "Rebbe, our publication is independent and completely objective." The Rebbe responded pointedly, "Independent, perhaps, but objective? There is no such thing. It is humanly impossible to be completely objective. Every person has a bias of some kind." Now, personally, I understand the Rebbe's words to mean that while one can live without an agenda, one cannot live without a bias. Through a mix of nurture, of nature, and of free will, each one of us possesses a certain lens that frames and that forms and that sometimes distorts the way we see ourselves, the way we see others, and the way we look at the world around us. It is simply impossible to erase all traces of our personality, of our past experiences, of our deeply held beliefs, from our observations, from our expressions, from our actions, no matter how hard we try. And it's this frame that we adopt, whether consciously or unconsciously, that deeply impacts the way we perceive reality itself. So based on this fact of subjectivity, as I would call it, the following questions arise. What are your biases? What are the default frames through which you see the world? And the most important question of all is, can they be adjusted to better serve yourself and others? Because if our biases inevitably color the way we interpret and experience the world, it follows that a primary focus of life should be to assess and to reset our biases. You know, the Rebbe would often receive correspondence. And I have to say, a very large percentage of that correspondence expressed people's grief, their sorrow, their pain, their struggles, their challenges in all areas of life. And sometimes the Rebbe would receive multiple letters from the same individual complaining, and sometimes I would venture to say the Rebbe would receive letters from what I would call a chronic kvetcher. Is anyone familiar with the term kvetcher, a kvetch? So there are certain individuals that kvetch for the sake of kvetching. It reminds me of the joke of the fellow who used to come to work every day with a peanut butter sandwich. And every day he would take out the sandwich and he would complain, "Oh, peanut butter again, peanut butter again." At some point, his friends told him, "Listen, why don't you tell your wife that you don't like peanut butter? And she'll make you a tuna sandwich." He says, "My wife? I make my own sandwiches." So the Rebbe received a letter from such an individual, it seems. And the Rebbe says, in our world, everything is a mixture of good and bad. Human beings must choose which aspects to emphasize, to contemplate, and to pursue. How instructive it is, that which our sages teach us about Adam, the first human being, who is called an ingrate, a kafui tov, even before being banished from the Garden of Eden while living in literal paradise. He complains about his circumstances. You all know that instead of focusing on the 99.9% of that which was available to him in the Garden of Eden, he chose to focus on the 1 or 0.1%, that one solitary tree that was not available to him. On the other hand, the Rebbe says, there were Jewish men and women who thanked and blessed the Creator and recited the morning blessings while they were living through the horrifying German concentration camps. A number of months ago, I had the pleasure of interviewing a very special woman, Dr. Edith Eger, who wrote 2 best-selling books, one called The Choice, another called The Gift. She's 93 or 94 years old, a super empowering woman. And she shared a number of accounts of her experience at Auschwitz and how she saw people whose faith deepened, including her own, if I am not mistaken, under the harshest of conditions. The Rebbe concludes the letter, ultimately, everyone's circumstances will be somewhere in between those two extremes. My point is not to admonish you, but to underscore the reality that the type of lives that we live, whether filled with satisfaction, filled with meaning, or the opposite, depends in large measure on our willpower, which dictates whether we will focus on the positive or the negative. And here's the thing, when writing a book about the Lubavitch Rebbe, the greatest challenge is trying to discover personal biographical details and data about the Rebbe, because the Rebbe, as you know, was fiercely private. And in one instance, the Rebbe did share a very moving disclosure to one of his Hasidim. And he alluded to his determination to see things positive as stemming from his harrowing past. And he said, and I quote, "I worked on myself to always look at things in a positive light. Otherwise, I simply could not have survived." Now, this deceptively simple statement encapsulates the basic premise of the book I was privileged to work on, Positivity Bias, namely, that living a life of positivity is a matter of choice, not circumstance, and derives from perspective, not personality. Put differently, reality is created by the mind. We can change our reality by changing our mind. It's not the events of our lives that shape us, but the meanings that we assign to those events. And once pointed out, the Rebbe's positivity bias, it's impossible to miss. As the hundreds of letters and stories and anecdotes in this book bring to life and to light, the Rebbe's positivity bias illuminated every corner of his thoughts, every nuance of his speech, and infused his every action, reaction, and interaction with the power of positive living. And I would posit that the more you learn about the Rebbe's positivity bias, the more you will begin to notice its redemptive rays and infectious positivity and optimism that's reflected and embodied in your personal shliach and shlucha, and indeed in shluchim throughout the world. So some of you are familiar with one example. The Rebbe was very particular and meticulous about the language he used. There's a chapter in the book called Positive Language, and it includes some 50 or 60 examples, many more of which unfortunately cannot exist because of the word count that I had committed to. So for example, many of you know the Rebbe did not use the term deadline. Instead, he encouraged the use of the term due date. And that sounds perhaps semantical, but in fact is profound, because a deadline implies that whatever process was begun is now coming to an end and passing away. Whereas, of course, a due date implies that whatever we worked on is now beginning to come to life, to fruition, and will now take on a life of its own. The Rebbe discouraged, for example, the term undertaker. Undertake. People sometimes say, I'm undertaking a new project. Perhaps because of its association with undertaker, which of course represents the opposite of life. Or perhaps because to undertake something implies not to take it on fully and wholeheartedly. So in the next few minutes, I want to highlight a few examples of the Rebbe's positivity bias. But first, on a lighter note, perhaps you know the joke about the waiter who was walking through the restaurant and asking patrons, excuse me, is everything all right? Is everything all right? And people were responding, going through the restaurant, is everything all right? And at some point, the waiter comes across two Jewish patrons and asks, is anything all right? Is anything all right? Friends, have you ever wondered why newspapers are so full of bad news? Or why people often spend so much more time fretting about what's wrong in their lives instead of appreciating what's going right? Why do painful experiences take up so much more real estate in our memory? So actually, scientists have coined the term negativity bias to describe this phenomenon of how human consciousness relates to the world. Essentially, our negativity bias ensures that experiences of a more negative nature have a greater effect on our psychological state than neutral or positive ones, even when of equal intensity. Accordingly, we use more brain space to process negative experiences than positive ones, because negative stimuli, if not responded to appropriately, can literally be fatal. Now, out of necessity, we have become masters of fixating on the negative aspects of our lives and environments. And this is only natural. The problem is that this negativity bias has a side effect. Since we're always on high alert for potential dangers, the positive aspects of our lives tend to get less attention. For example, join me on the following thought exercise. If you've had 9 experiences or interactions that were positive during the day and 1 negative experience, which are you most likely to remember and dwell on at the end of the day? I see many of you, some of you nodding. I think you relate. Typically, very often and only naturally, do we dwell on the one that didn't work out, on the harsh word of rebuke or criticism rather than the compliment, etc. Establishing a positive mindset is therefore quite difficult, as it goes against the grain of our established nature. And yet maintaining a positive perspective in the midst of hardship is essential to elevating our quality of life. You know, Shimon Peres once said that optimists and pessimists both die the same deaths, but they live very different lives. I would like to beg to differ, because in some respects, they even die different deaths. According to an article recently published by the BBC, not only does optimism and positive outlook add life to our years, it adds years to our life. According to the findings quoted in the article, optimists tend to live between 11 and 15% longer than pessimists on average. That is absolutely radical. Imagine someone came to the market tomorrow, announced that they have a pill that you can purchase, and if you take that pill, you can live between 11 and 15% longer. I am certain it would become an instant international success and his company would skyrocket in value. Who wouldn't want to live 11 to 15% longer? So friends, I'm here to tell you that actually based on neuroscience and social science, developing a positivity bias, a positive outlook, literally does exactly that. The Rebbe consistently insisted that we can shift our lens on life the better by making conscious efforts to focus and dwell on the positive. For you see, the opposite of entitlement is not gratitude. It's awareness of our blessings. With awareness of our blessings, gratitude comes automatically. Let me share with you a beautiful poem written by a mom. A little boy came up to me in the kitchen one evening while I was fixing supper, and he handed me a piece of paper that he had been writing on. After drying my hands on an apron, I read it, and this is what it said. For cutting the grass, Mom, I'm charging you $5. For cleaning up my room this week, I'm charging you $1. For babysitting my kid brother while you went shopping, 25 cents. For getting a good report card, $5. Well, I looked at him standing there expectantly. 1,000 memories flashed through my mind. I picked up the paper, I turned it over, and this is what I wrote. For the 9 months I carried you while you were growing inside of me, no charge. For the nights that I've stayed up with you, doctored you, and prayed for you, no charge. For all the trying times and tears that you've caused through the years, no charge. For all the nights filled with dread and the worries ahead, no charge. For advice and the knowledge and the cost of your college, no charge. Son, when you add it all up, the full cost of my love for you is no charge. When he finished reading, he had big tears in his eyes. And he looked up at me and he said, Mom, I sure do love you. And then he took his pen and in great big letters, he wrote 3 words, paid in full. Friends, you know the joke about the Al Yiddish Baba. She was standing outside in the Lower East Side selling pretzels at her pretzel stand. She charged a quarter for a pretzel. And there was a really nice businessman. He used to come out every day from his office. He would put down a quarter, but he wouldn't take a pretzel. And this goes on every day for a year. What a wonderful gentleman. A year later, the fellow comes, he puts down his quarter, he begins to walk away, and the woman comes up to him and says, Sir, can I have a word with you? He says, yes, but I think I know what you're going to tell me. You're going to ask me, Sir, why are you so kind to me? Why are you so magnanimous? She says to the fellow, nope, sir, I wasn't going to ask you that. I was just going to inform you that the price of the pretzels went up to 35 cents. Friends, isn't that the story of our lives? Hashem, God Almighty, provides for us unconditionally, whether or not we are deserving. And what do we do from time to time? We take God aside and we inform him that due to inflation, the cost of our lifestyle has gone up to 35 cents. No matter what else is going on in our lives, if we are alive, simply alive, we have something to be grateful for. We just need to take the time to recognize and appreciate it. Indeed, one of my favorite stories in the book is that the Rebbe was once asked by a child, out of all Jewish prayers, which is your favorite? And you know what the Rebbe responded? The morning prayer of Modeh Ani. It's that 12-word prayer that we recite while still in bed, immediately upon awakening, thanking God simply for the gift of life itself. Thanking Hashem for a new day on this precious earth, and for the 86,400 seconds he deposited in our daily bank account, saying, use this, my dear child. Make the most of it. Friends, every day we are given a new lease of life is God's way of saying, my beloved child, the full cost of my love for you is no charge. And so one way to focus and dwell on the positive is to literally count our blessings every day, no matter how small they may seem. And towards this end, our sages instituted that we recite at least 100 blessings each and every day. It sounds excessive. It sounds a little bit over the top. But this practice of near constant expressions of gratitude throughout the day literally has the power to sensitize us to Hashem's gifts and his presence all around us if we would but stop and notice. And so a practical tip or a practical tool I want to leave you with at this point is that whenever you're feeling a particular experience or overwhelm, when you feel like you can't breathe or you're underwater or you're treading or you're on that treadmill of existence, take a moment, sit down with a piece of paper and pen or close your eyes and reflect on, identify 3 blessings that you have currently in your life, right there, right then. And then close your eyes and say thank you to Hashem for each one of those blessings. I can assure you that within a matter of minutes, maybe even less, your entire disposition, your demeanor, your mindset can literally be uplifted and transformed. Another area of the Rebbe's positivity bias was his ability to see past the surface and into the essence of others, always searching for and finding the good in them. When your eye, your lens on life is good, what you see in others and the world around you will be good. The following video is a beautiful example. I'm going to share with you a beautiful clip. I would like to actually stop the video for a moment because I want to draw you into this exercise. I want you to stop and think to yourself how you would react if you were in that situation. If you were sitting in a synagogue and someone came in with blatant disregard to synagogue protocol, either went on their phone if it was Chabad or took out a newspaper as this fellow did, what would be your knee-jerk instinctive reaction? Now, I would venture to say, and it's only natural to suggest, that many of us would feel somewhat taken aback, maybe even offended or judgmental. If you're not interested in being in the synagogue, we would think to ourselves, why are you here in the first place? It isn't respectful, it isn't decent, it isn't okay to come into a shul or to come into a particular space with its own culture, with its own norms, with its own protocol, and to disregard those. And that's exactly what this individual experienced. And he was so perturbed that he decided to sit down and write a letter to the Rebbe. And I stopped the video in order to share this particular thought exercise with you because I want you to recognize just how radical and how redemptive the Rebbe's reproach was, as expressed in his answer. What a powerful response. But you know, what I'd like to suggest is that the Rebbe's response is not some form of whitewashing or the type of view you have if you're wearing rose-colored glasses. It isn't some type of abstract naivete. It's actually a very precise, a surgical, a logical analysis of what the Rebbe saw in this particular encounter. Here's a man who clearly wasn't raised in the embrace, in the cocoon of Jewish observance, Jewish practice, Jewish culture, Jewish norms. He clearly didn't understand where he was, and he didn't have the respect, not because he was disrespectful, God forbid, but because he hasn't been given the benefit of a Jewish education. He was uninitiated, unaffiliated. This we can all attest to by the fact that he took out a newspaper in the middle of the service. And if that's the case, the Rebbe asked the obvious question, what was he doing in the synagogue? And the Rebbe's answer is profound. Here's a man who chose to go to a place where he feels illiterate, where he feels like an outsider, only to take out his newspaper. And why? Because he wanted to help 9 others make a minyan. That's an act of chesed. That's not a limud zchus, ethereal, abstract naivete. That's a very logical analysis of this particular episode. I share that with you because one area in particular where a good eye is transformational is in personal relationships, whether at work or within the family. You see, interpersonal relationships are complicated. They're messy. Because each of us have different views, associations, narratives, word choices, insecurities, and this creates near constant opportunities for misunderstanding and for judgment. In any conversation or encounter, there is the possibility for the misappropriation of meaning and intention, which gives rise to unnecessary skepticism and the breakdown of trust. Some of you may know the joke about the difference between the English word complete and finished, which seem identical. What's the difference between complete and finished? I see Yoel Caroline responding with the answer. I think. Not sure. The answer is, if you marry the right person, you're complete. And if you marry the wrong person, you're finished. So the same word can mean very different things in a different context, or to different people. So we can easily fall into the default mode in which we immediately assume the worst about others. Take, for example, the story of a little girl who was holding 2 apples with both hands. Her mother came in and asked the little daughter, "Sweetie, could you give mom one of your apples?" The girl looked up for a moment, and then she suddenly took a quick bite out of one apple, and then she takes a quick bite out of the other one. The mom felt the smile on her face freeze. She tried very hard to conceal her disappointment. The little girl then handed one of the bitten apples to her mother and said, "Mom, here you are. This one is the sweeter one." Friends, imagine how positive and kind our daily encounters could be if we would adopt a good eye, an ayin tov, and condition ourselves to view others more generously. Imagine a world in which the baseline of human interaction is extending others the benefit of doubt. What an important teaching, especially in the current times, which sadly are divisive times and polarizing times, times of rhetoric, etc. Ayin Tov is the way to heal, is the way to reform some of that toxicity. Outside in the wider world, but also internally in our domestic environment, as it were. The good news is that we can rewire our neurological pathways. We can shift our patterns of perception to consciously focus on the positive in others. The other day, I came across a very interesting Facebook post from Humans of New York. There was a photo of two doctors sitting on a park bench, and this is what the caption read: "We are eye doctors." What's something about the eye that most people do not realize? The eye does not see. The brain sees. The eye just transmits. So what we see isn't only determined by what comes through the eyes. What we see is affected by our memories, by our feelings, and by what we've seen before. You see, it's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. Here I want to share with you one of the most important lines that I hope you can take with you if you take nothing else. If you change the way you look at people, the people you look at change. I'm going to say that again for emphasis. If you change the way you look at people, the people you look at change. Here's a beautiful example. I'm going to share with you the final video, share with you tonight, which has a beautiful illustration of this idea.
I was at Torres Chaim, which was on Belmont Avenue in Brooklyn. Shortly before my 10th birthday, my mother,
That's not what I was saying.
my baby sister and myself went to see the Rebbe.
It's not music.
We went to 770, and my mother started to talk to the Rebbe. My son, Shalom, he's been thrown out of the yeshivas, and the Rebbe.
Let me try that again. Just a second.
He says this, and he's not listening. Started to talk to the Rebbe. My son, Shalom, he's been thrown out of the yeshivas, and the rabbi says this, and he's not listening, and the rabbis are complaining. He doesn't like the school, he doesn't like the homework, he doesn't like the program, he likes eating stuff in class, and then my mother's crying and crying because she was searching for answers. The Rebbe turns to me, and then he smiles, and he goes, "Come here." So I started the conversation because I was ready. I said to the Rebbe, "You're the Rebbe?" So the Rebbe looks at me with a big smile. He says to me 3 questions. The first question was, "Are you a good boy?" I said, "No," with conviction. I was ready. I was used to the scene. So then he says, "You like school?" I said, "No." Then he says to me, "Do you listen to your mother?" I said, "No." So with a big smile, he turns to my mother and he goes, Emes, it's good. He said I was Emes. At that point, it pulled me right back into the Yiddish guy.
So I bought a Greyhound bus ticket for $100.
What a beautiful story. And what's really powerful about the story is that here's a man who came to the Rebbe as a rebellious child, ready for a good fight. All of that resistance, however, melted away the moment he encountered someone who saw in him innocence, not insolence, the truth behind the tirade, and someone who defined him by his divine soul rather than by his defiant spirit. Zogt emes. He says the truth. Again, not a naive interpretation, but rather something so profound that cuts to the heart and to the essence of this exchange. Once again, as I started off with, if you change the way you look at people, the people you look at change. You see, you know what happens when we are lovingly shown our essential goodness and our inner truth? We begin to see the same in ourselves, and then we begin to act that out. That's how we started with Rabbi Sachs, Olav Shalom, saying the most transformational moments in life are when someone believes in you more than you believe in yourself. Let's move into the third and final aspect of the positivity bias I'd like to share and dwell on tonight. And that was the Rebbe's unwavering optimism and faith in the future. Many of you know the joke about the difference between the Jewish pessimist and the Jewish optimist. The Jewish pessimist says things can't get any worse. And the Jewish optimist says, yes, they can. In a letter addressed to Yitzchak ben Tzvi, the second president of Israel, the Rebbe wrote, and I quote, "From the time that I was a child attending Cheder, and even earlier than that, there began to take form in my mind a vision of the future redemption, the redemption of the Jewish people from its last exile. In many ways, this vision is what made the Rebbe unique among other towering Jewish figures in our time. Most leaders see their life and impact in terms of their specific generation. But the Rebbe viewed his role through the wider lens of Jewish history in its entirety. Wherever you look in the Rebbe's teachings, there it is, the dream and the vision of Mashiach. Sometimes implicit, but more often explicit. In almost every one of his talks and letters, the Rebbe reveals the aspiration that is closest to his heart, a burning desire to see our imperfect world enter into an era of peace and wholeness, devoid of conflict, of war, of suffering, replete with revealed goodness and the pursuit of godly knowledge. You know, the Rebbe was once asked, if you could choose any era in history in which to live, which would it be? The Rebbe answered without skipping a beat, this one. You see, traditionally, the biblical prophecies describing the times of Mashiach were viewed through supernatural lens. But according to the Rebbe, many of those biblical prophecies have begun to come into existence at various degrees of actualization in ways that seem entirely natural. For instance, the Rebbe saw in the rise of feminism the beginning stages of the prophecy of Jeremiah. For the Lord has created something new on the earth, a woman shall rise above a man. In many countries and cultures the world over, there has continued to be a general shift in the direction of advancing women's voices, women's issues, and women's rights. Today, women are increasingly gaining political power. We just saw this in the States. We saw this in the recent elections. I'm speaking from the UK, where our former Prime Minister was Theresa May. And before her, there was Margaret Thatcher. But you're starting to see this spread throughout the world. Today, women make up more than a fifth of members of national parliaments and counting. And how about the following prophecy from Yeshayahu, who says, then will the eyes of the blind be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then will the lame leap like a deer. Through modern day medical advances and miracles, today the lame can walk and dance with the aid of prosthetics. They can even compete at the highest levels of sports. 80% of visual impairment has already been cured. And through stem cell research, scientists are well on their way to curing deafness. On so many occasions, the Rebbe insisted that the arc of history bends forward and that ours will be the generation to shepherd human history across the finish line once and for all. It is this expression of the Rebbe's positivity bias, perhaps more than any other, that is so profoundly relevant in our turbulent and unsettling times, especially of late, in an era that leaves many wondering whether their children will inherit a world in reality worse off than the one that they were born into. Indeed, it was recently reported that only 5% of the British population think that the world is improving. In the United States, the numbers are far more optimistic. 6% of Americans think that the world is improving. But as the Rebbe consistently pointed out, the truth is that this pessimism is based on ignorance. You see, rather than regressing, which is what it often feels like, our world is progressing and at breakneck speed. You know the joke about the Israeli economy, which was in crisis, and the Knesset called an emergency session, and David gets up and he says, I have a fantastic idea. Let's go to war with the United States of America. Everyone goes crazy. Go to war with the US, they're our ally. He says, let me explain. He says, we'll go to war with the United States, we'll lose the war, and then America will do whatever she does when she wins a war. America will pour billions of dollars of humanitarian aid into our streets, into our hospitals, into our schools, and our economic crisis will be solved. At this point, Zev gets up in the back. He says, that's all good if we lose, but what if we win? In January 2018, Time magazine welcomed Bill Gates as its first guest editor in its 94-year history. He designed the edition around the mindset he has been endorsing for years, optimism. He invited the world's greatest minds and experts on world progress to share their findings. The idea that on the whole, the world is getting much better is not some naively optimistic view. It's backed by data. Friends, we live in an era which we pride ourselves as being data-driven society, data-driven. So let's follow the data. According to a Swedish economic historian named Johan Norberg, he wrote a very important book on the topic called Progress. If someone had told you in 1990 that over the next 25 years, world hunger would decline by 40%, that child mortality would halve, and that extreme poverty would fall by 3/4, you'd have told them that they are a naive fool. But the fools were right. This is truly what happened. Not just that, 200 years ago, 90% of the world lived in extreme poverty. Today, that number is 10%. And there are so many staggering statistics that are so empowering and enlightening. There's another book by Hans Rosling called Factfulness, or by Steven Pinker called Enlightenment Now, and many others that have jumped on this bandwagon of following the data to demonstrate that this world in its fundamentals, that is to say, in its axiomatic parameters of human well-being and progress. And that's not to say there are no setbacks. That's not to say that there aren't new issues, but it is to say that when it comes to the fundamentals, this world is marching forward at breakneck speed. Indeed, according to the prominent Israeli public intellectual Yuval Harari, more people die today from eating too much than from eating too little. On a lighter note, you know the joke about the couple who were very health conscious, and they were in their 70s. One day they were driving down the highway, and sadly, out of nowhere, a truck comes and crashes into their car, levels the car, and they pass away. They come to heaven, and Angel Gabriel begins to show them around. He takes them to their penthouse suite, and the husband is enamored. And he asks the angel, tell me, how much is it going to cost in rent? And the angel says, sir, this is heaven. It's all free. They go out to the golf course, fantastic golf. The fellow says, how much for a round of golf? He says, I think I told you already, it's heaven, everything's free. And then they make their way to the beautiful ballroom for lunch, and it's a lunch like nothing else. You have exotic food stations from around the world. You have top Michelin star chefs. At this point, the fellow turns to the angel and says, tell me, where's the low-calorie section? Where's the kale? Where's the flaxseed? The fellow turns to the angel Gabriel and says, sir, that's the best part of heaven. You don't have to worry about cholesterol and calories. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. At this point, the guy turns to his wife and he says, honey, if not for you and your silly health food, we couldn't have been here 10 years ago. Revolutions, uprisings, rapid shifts in consciousness, as unsettling as these things may be to our lives in the moment and to the established order of the day, they are ultimately leading us towards a more perfect union, a higher system of truth and harmony. This was the unyielding faith of the Rebbe. The time is now. The world is ready for more light. The question is, are we? Can we keep our composure and our direction amid what appears to be the madness of a new world being born? Can we hold on to the promise of goodness and godliness revealed? Can we see through the brokenness and not lose hope? This takes work, and this takes faith. The work of cultivating an expansive outlook to see the resplendent forest through the smoldering trees. And the work of personalizing, internalizing, and actualizing our very own positivity bias. In conclusion, from the redemptive dream of a precocious child to a daring vision of cosmic renewal, the Rebbe's teachings and mandate all coalesce and culminate and a clarion call to action. Our generation is uniquely positioned to calibrate the conditions for monumental shift. The future is literally up to each one of us. We are no longer waiting for Mashiach. Mashiach is waiting for us. A new day is approaching. Let's awaken the dawn. L'chaim, l'chaim.
Hi, Rabbi Kalmenson. I just wanted to follow on your beautiful words that we could change the change to positivity, something that could be instantaneously made. There was a person traveling the train, and he sees this father with his children, and the children are making such a mess, and they're acting so wild, and he's thinking so negatively about these children. He said, his father doesn't educate them. Why doesn't he let them behave like this in such a way, such a form? And he gets so upset. And as he's about to come and say something to the father, someone tells him, this father and children are coming now on the way back from the mother's funeral. So at a moment, instantaneously, the entire look of this, the way this person was looking at the father changes in a moment. So you could change sometimes from negative to positive with just how you look at things. This morning, I had an experience myself like this, sitting in my Chabad house with L'chaim, L'chaim, Nara, Boch Schneur, Ben Chana, she never for Shalema, and Rabbi Mendel Kalmenson, and Ilana Bas Mazal, she never for Shalema, L'chaim, L'chaim.
I'm L'chaim, and also Refuah Shleima for Moshe ben Chasya Adasa, and everyone else who needs a Refuah Shleima.
Chana Bas Esther.
Chana Bas Esther, for anyone who needs a Refuah Shleima, complete and speedy recovery, dealing with the pandemic or any illness. We could only merit Mashiach, and that everyone should be back to full health, and we should be able to celebrate this wonderful holiday of Yutas Kislev, this holiday of redemption, with the ultimate redemption, with the coming of Mashiach. I so far only see Rabbi Kalmenson one question, so it's good. You must have answered everybody's questions.
Hang on 1 second, my opinion. I'm just going to finish up here with, I said earlier this morning, I was sitting in the Chabad house and I was davening, and I had my kids there, and I was trying to get them to daven, and they were davening nicely, but I had the challenge of davening myself, focusing on my own davening. And I kind of felt frustrated that I can't daven, but I got to give my kids to daven. And then I thought about it, and I said, you know what? The reason why I'm a little frustrated, because I look at it that I need to have my davening going well, but who said that Hashem needs my davening? Hashem wants my children daven better than me. So I kind of, made a switch, and instead of being frustrated, look at this great success that I got my children to daven so well. So again, just some practicality. In addition to what Rabbi Kalmenson said, is all the way we look at things, how we define success, and things could really change to the positive with our awareness. Go ahead, Rabbi Pinny. You are muted. Rabbi Pinny, you're muted. We can't hear you.
So first of all, thank you very much, Rabbi Kalmenson. We're getting a lot of nice feedback publicly and privately. How wonderful your insights are. We have somebody who's a teacher in school, and she says she's going to steal a whole bunch of your stories and share it with her students, which is, I'm sure you have no problem. And so we said we would have some questions. You're open to address either some questions that we're going to pop up on the screen now, or your own thoughts of questions that you received. Let's ask the one question that we had from an iPhone. Mr. iPhone asked, how do you deal with something really negative?
Anything a little more specific? Or generally speaking, how do we deal with challenges?
You're asking Mr. iPhone. That's not my question. I don't have anything negative. Look at it. We're having a wonderful time. Look how many Jews are together on a Saturday night. It's beautiful. So you could pick something specific, take an example, whatever you like.
Right. So I think that, one of the basic premise of the book, like I said, and I started off with, and there's so much, the entire genre of positive thinking and self-help, really, which in a certain sense was triggered by the example of the book by Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, who, by the way, there's a chapter in the book about his interactions with the Rebbe. He himself experienced a very low point where he was ostracized by the entire psychoanalytic community, such that he was actually signing his papers of resignation, and he had planned to relocate to Australia to live with a sibling there. And literally during that period, and even during those moments, someone came knocking on his door. It's quite a long story, you could read in the book, but essentially it was a messenger from the Rebbe telling him, do not back down. He said to continue doing what you're doing. You're at the cusp and you will actually make great change. And of course, today we look back and we see that Viktor Frankl single-handedly, I would argue, perhaps more than any other in the self-help genre, really transformed people's paradigm and gave them the ability to overcome challenges. He literally wrote that book in Auschwitz, essentially. First half of the book, he shares his personal encounters there. And look at what he did. He took that place, that hell on earth, I don't think there's any way we can describe it otherwise, where by any objective measures or barometers, there was literally nothing to look forward to. And the brutality and the cruelty and the callousness, et cetera, is well documented by now. And he managed to turn that into a laboratory for positive thinking. He turned that into his classroom. He turned that into his research center to discover some of the most empowering insights into the human condition and empowering insights into the human condition. So I think, again, the basic premise is it's not our circumstances that define or even determine our life's trajectory. It's how we react, it's how we respond. So much depends on what goes on in here, inside our mind. And this, by the way, is exactly what we're celebrating on Yud Tes Kislev. Why do I say that? Because what is Chassidus, if not a lens, if not a particular way and frame through which and by which to see the world? A transformative lens. And it's not a coincidence that the Chassidim were originally called the Freiliche, the happy ones, as many of you may know. Why were they called the happy ones? Incidentally, and this is one of the most mind-blowing details relating to the Yud Tes Kislev that I came across. But one of the arguments that the Misnagdim made, that the opponents of the Alter Rebbe made to the government, one of the proofs they brought that he was allegedly, in their view and in their argumentation, starting a new religion was the fact, they wrote, that Hasidim are happy. And here they wrote, they're not just happy when they're doing a mitzvah, when they're in the synagogue or they're engaging in a ritual act, they're happy all the time. And that goes against the established order of Judaism. These are the words written by the opponents of the Alter Rebbe. Could you imagine? Where does that simcha, where does that joy come from? You think Hasidim have easier lives? You think Hasidim have, by objective standards, better lives? I would argue no, not at all. It's not about the circumstances. It's not about the objective parameters. And there is a gift of insight. There is a treasure trove of wisdom. There is a curriculum, a program of thinking called Hasidus that, if internalized properly, is transformative and allows us to overcome the challenges of day-to-day life. Each person has their own challenge, but underlying each and every challenge is a personal communication between God and you, the individual, undergoing that challenge. And it's God's way of saying, you have what it takes. You're ready for the next level. Does that make it pleasant? No. But does that make it overcomable? Yes. And that provides us with a deeper sense of satisfaction when we look back on how we reacted and how we responded to life's challenges. This is an important point. Why did I share with you the term a program or a curriculum? Because it's like the analogy of a soldier. If a soldier has no training and suddenly he's thrust into battle, that is not the moment, that is not the time to begin to give him the principles of combat. It's too late. Fear will immediately kick in. You will become paralyzed by the bullets whizzing, by the sounds of missiles, etc., etc. But when you take a soldier and you give him the proper training before he enters the battlefield, when he enters the battlefield, all that training kicks in automatically. All that training has now become instinct. Chassidus is the training. Without the internalization, without the spiritual boot camp, so to speak, without the hard, diligent work of conscientiously internalizing these ideas, when you hit the battlefields of life, they are very difficult, sometimes feel like they feel impossible to surmount. But if you do that training, when you're in the battlefield, that training kicks in, and suddenly you go from strength to strength. I want to share with you one moment we all witnessed. When Rabbi Goldstein, the Chabad Shliach of Poway, on Pesach, his Chabad house, as you know, in the morning during services was attacked by a terrorist. Thank God his gun jammed, but very tragically, a very special soul was lost. Rabbi Goldstein's own finger was shot off. And how does he react in real time? Let's stop, let's dwell, let's analyze, because this is the scientific approach. How does a Chabad Chassid, the Shaliach, react literally when under attack and under existential threat? He doesn't run, he doesn't hide. He confronts. And then he gets up on the chair when the terrorist had been kicked out, had been chased out. And he gathers his community, whoever was behind, remained, and he began to say, Am Yisrael Chai. We will not cow. We will not bow. We will not fall. We will not falter. We will go stronger and grow from strength to strength. We will not allow darkness to take hold. We will take this moment and we will find a way to get forward and to grow through this experience. That's the battlefield. I can't think of a more vivid depiction of a battlefield that a shliach in recent time had to undergo. And how did he come through that moment? His training kicked in. Those messages came from his years in yeshiva, from his years of every morning learning Chassidus, and then spending a few minutes before davening, internalizing the Chassidus, and then going back to those ideas again and again, because that's how it's done, my friends. Through contemplation and through meditation, that's how you do internalization. And internalization translates into eternalization. If it's just an idea, it's nice to share at the Shabbos table, Dvar Torah, lovely, but that's not going to help you on the battlefield of life. To change you on the battlefield of life, you have to take those ideas and internalize them. And if you do, your life is changed. Rabbi Goldstein was simply enacting. He was simply acting out the Chassidus that he had learned. The perspective of the Rebbe, the redemptive and positive perspective, which was that tragedy, we may not explain tragedy, but we have a response to tragedy. As the Rebbe told the Chabad community in Israel after there was the terrorist attack on the yeshiva there, it sadly took the lives of many students. That through continued building, you will be comforted. So that is ultimately the teaching the Rebbe shared time and again, and I believe that's what we Hasidim, and by extension, all of the wonderful souls gathered here tonight can take with us. As I said before, these ideas can literally transform your life, but the way to achieve that is by not just studying them, but internalizing them at gatherings like this.
One a question on added question is, what can one learn or do to really implement these techniques so it should really work?
So that's a very good question. First of all, there's an entire chapter on the book with practices that help translate the teachings into action. That's very important. I would highly recommend reading that chapter. But that's in that chapter, I actually share practices for each of the particular themes. So let me give you a simple example. One of the chapters, for example, is called Lashon Tov. And in that chapter, I argue that the Rebbe's response to Lashon Hara was not the absence of Lashon Hara, but was the opposite of Lashon Hara, which is Lashon Tov. There are many Jewish communities that make a very big deal of the prohibition against speaking ill of a fellow Jew or a fellow human being. As you know, friends, Judaism does not believe in freedom of speech. There are certain things you cannot say, even if they're true. including negative speech about another human being. So there are certain communities that they make a very big deal and a big emphasis on not speaking Lashon Hara, and very often they'll have a campaign where they'll encourage a group, their adherents, their constituents, to stop speaking Lashon Hara for 24 hours, for example. A beautiful concept, very noble idea. In the Rebbe's view, however noble the absence of Lashon Hara is, that's not the antidote to Lashon Hara. Because the absence of Lashon Hara only means that I'm not speaking what I would like to speak. The Rebbe very often taught that the way to banish darkness is not through a process of elimination, but illumination. There's an entire chapter on that theme as well. And the point is, Lashon Tov means making a point of saying something positive and empowering when you meet another. There are so many examples. I included many in one chapter, but again, because of brevity, I couldn't include more. I would encourage you, the next time you watch videos of the Rebbe giving out dollars to people, keep this in mind, Lashon Tov, this idea. You will see how often, how regular, how consistent, and how conscientious the Rebbe is about turning every encounter into an opportunity to say something uplifting and empowering to this individual. The Rebbe taught a very powerful mystical idea that in the same way when you speak ill of someone, you activate the ill within them, in a sense. When you speak positive about someone, you activate the good in them and you bring it to the fore. So on a practical level, Rabbi Pinny, I would encourage everyone here to take upon themselves a hachlata tova in the spirit of Chassidus, Yutas Kislev, and the heart of Tanya, Perek Lamed Beis, V'ahavta l'reacha. Make a point for the next week, every day, to elevate 3 encounters you have with others. Doesn't matter whom. Find a way to share with them something complimentary, something meaningful, something specific, not something general and generic. When the Rebbe met the Rabbi Kaduri, the Kabbalist from Israel, the Rebbe told him, your influence shouldn't just be in Israel, it should expand to the entire universe as expressed in your name, Kaduri, which comes from the word Kadur, the globe, the planet. When the Rebbe met a woman from Florida who had a hobby, she would plant, she loved gardening. And every time she came to see the Rebbe, she would bring some fruit with her. And so the Rebbe said to her husband, did you bring fruit from your wife's Garden of Eden, Gan Eden? So empowering. When the Rebbe spoke to someone from Texas, the Rebbe said, you come from the place about which it says in the Torah, we read it in last week's portion, Zeh Shara Shamayim. When Jacob put his head down to rest and he slept, he dreamt of the ladder linking heaven and earth, with the angels ascending and descending. So the Rebbe used that phrase when talking to someone from Texas, because in Texas, that's where the rocket went up to space. This is the gateway to heaven. In so many interactions, the Rebbe found a way to take a unique, specific characteristic of the individual, their hobby, their passion, even their location, and elevate it. This, I believe, is very, very powerful, practical, simple tool to elevate your encounters, your exchanges with others. And you will see that once you inject that positivity, it will be reciprocated. And the entire encounter will be literally transformed. So that's a practical suggestion, Rabbi Pinny, about one specific theme called Lashon Tov.
Rabbi Kalmenson, Rabbi Caroline writes here, and I wanted to actually ask you about this. If I may add, the power of speech applies equally and possibly primarily about oneself. Don't you think that love to others and looking positive in others begin with love yourself? Could you just share this l'chaim about this idea about loving yourself and looking positive at yourself, not be criticizing of yourself, which is something that a lot of people are dealing with?
Of course.
L'chaim.
There's a story.
If just 1 second, Rabbi Oirechman, if you could hold that thought, I just want to say on what you just finished, because otherwise I'll forget, is that it just goes back to the story that you showed about that one man who was kicked out of yeshiva, and the Rebbe found the positive in all his negativity. He connected to the Rebbe because the Rebbe found the one positive thing. And I can tell you, I could relate to him very much because I experienced the same type of, I was the one who was always getting kicked out of yeshiva. And, my energy, I started a business, for those who know. And then all of a sudden, when it came time when I asked the Rebbe for a blessing to buy a house and stay in Crown Heights, the Rebbe saw in my energy it fit to be worthy of going out and being one of his emissaries here in Florida. So the Rebbe always saw the positive in everyone, and he always wanted everybody to channel that energy to its fullest. And if he thought that you could make a bigger difference coming to Florida and doing the work that we do, you see the Rebbe motivated you and inspired you. And that, in essence, was your opening video with Rabbi Sachs.
Very
Rabbi
true.
Sachs was going on a whole different path. And the Rebbe saw that he can have a life-changing decision, not only for himself, but for all the people that he inspired. And that's what I think really this night is all about and what your book's about. And I encourage you to write where you can buy your book. Oh, I see, Rabbi, it was posted by Rabbi Kalmenson's book. But this is what life's all about, and that's what Chabad's all about. That's what this evening, this holiday of your Kislev is all about. Knowing that each and every one of us could do so much more. And if we just change our perspective and our attitude, we could accomplish so much, not only in our own personal lives, but for all the people around us, and God willing, the world at large, with the coming of Mashiach. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Rabbi Oirechman, but otherwise I would have forgotten what I wanted to say. Oh, and I hope you remember what Rabbi Oirechman asked.
What is the Rebbe giving you in the picture in the back there? See, the Rebbe is giving you a box there. Was the matzahs?
So the Rebbe
behind you, the picture behind you.
Yeah. This was a very special moment that the Rebbe used to give matzah to everyone on Erev Pesach, and then in the later years, when it got too many people and the Rebbe's health, they were worried about his health. So only a chosen few, those who studied in Kollel and those who were rabbis of communities that lived close enough to be able to take the matzah and race back to their community before Pesach, were able to go in front of the Rebbe. They would receive a whole bag of matzah, and they were asked to be the emissaries to give the matzah out to the community. And I was privileged to get it for 2 years. After I got married, 1 year when I was in Kollel, and my first year that I was chosen to be the rabbi here in Cooper City, Florida. And that was actually the year I was in Kollel, the year after I got married, and I was young, dark, and handsome in the year of 1989. So,
listen, I mean, Rabbi, you're absolutely right. First of all, I think we can all acknowledge that we are so blessed that you accepted the Rebbe's invitation to be his emissary. How many thousands or tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of acts of goodness and kindness have been generated through your journey and trajectory. So Baruch Hashem, that you accepted that invitation and that charge and that mission. But you're absolutely right with Rabbi Sachs. It's a fascinating thing. If you've seen recently, the wonderful organization GEM, Jewish Educational Media, put out a beautiful video with Rabbi Sachs being interviewed, where he says that he asked the Rebbe when it came to his mission in life, what to do, and he offered the Rebbe 3 options. One of them was an academic, a professor, one was an economist, and one was a lawyer. And he said, imagine his surprise when the Rebbe actually crossed out all 3, and at the side of the margin of the page wrote rabbi, and eventually even encouraged him to become the chief rabbi. What would does our world need another Jewish lawyer? Another Jewish economist? Rabbi Sachs was one of the most eloquent spokespeople for not just Judaism, but religion at large. And I believe that one word has had a paradigm shift approach and effect on Rabbi Sachs. And there are many, many examples of this in the book. Rabbi Oirechman, to your point, I think it's a very, very important point. There are a number of stories where the Rebbe made very clear to people that the same prohibition against speaking ill of another applies to speaking ill of oneself. That is to say, not just technically, but emotionally, spiritually, speaking ill of anyone activates that particular characteristic. How often do we find ourselves saying, oh, I'm so silly, or I'm so stupid, or I'm such a this, I'm a such a that? It's just part and parcel of our vernacular, sadly. Worse yet, how often do the words of judgment that we speak echo words of judgment that we think? And that's unfortunately, I think, one of the challenges of our generation. Our generation, we exist in a world that has become quite judgmental. And unfortunately, the greatest challenge of this reality is that we internalize the judgment of others and we become our greatest critics. There's a beautiful story with the Rebbe where the educator came to see the Rebbe. And he chose a very personal and positive approach to his students. He was very warm and friendly. And this went against the grain of the established educational order of the day, which maybe this was in the 70s, when teachers or principals were very rigid, they were aloof, they were authoritarian to some extent, they were there to instill decorum, etc., and discipline. And his fellow students and teachers and even the principal told him, this is not the correct approach. You're being too friendly to the students. You're being too warm. When he went to see the Rebbe, he asked the Rebbe whether he should change his approach. And the Rebbe grew very serious. And the Rebbe said that today's students do not need more critics. They are their own greatest critics. They need kindness. They need supporters. They need, I'm paraphrasing, they need coaches. They need encouragement and empowerment. So we live in a world where we have become our own greatest critics, and it's time
just ignore it.
To change. It's time, I believe, the change happens inside ourselves. Because when we're less critical of ourselves, we're able to be more compassionate to others. And conversely, when we engage in compassion to others, we have to understand and recognize that we have to direct that compassion to ourselves as well. I don't think it's a coincidence at all that the verse, "V'ahavta l'recha kamocha," love your fellow like yourself, which is the bedrock of the golden rule that exists in every and any tradition, don't do unto others what you don't want done to yourself, etc., is worded in the way it is. Love your fellow like yourself. In other words, embedded in the very directive to love others is a directive to love yourself. And we might even say that the more you love yourself, the more capable you are of loving others. People who are not capable of loving themselves, everyone's capable, but people who are raised or people who internalized voices of judgment and voices of diminishment and inadequacy very often lack a certain element of extending unconditional love towards others. So Rabbi Oirechman, I couldn't agree with you more. We need to extend love to others, but charity starts at home. And in this case, it starts self-directed. And from that self-direction, it will expand to others.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Kalmenson. I don't know if anybody was on from the beginning and understand that for Rabbi Kalmenson, it's 2:00 in the morning. So I really thank you for all your words, your pearls of wisdom, and also for staying up so late and enlightening us and inspiring us with this wonderful message. I want to give a shout out to Harriet Shergin, who's been here. She was our first, she was one of our first callers tonight. She signed in one of the earliest, and it's nice to see you and everybody else who's joining. If anybody wants to shout out to someone they see, we're going to, again, try and continue doing these wonderful programs, these classes, and we hope you're inspired. We hope you enjoyed. I definitely think you should buy the book because we need to stay positive. And all I can tell you is the world is definitely changing, and God willing, thanks to the help of Chabad, all for the better. And there's something truly amazing on the horizon. And the Rebbe promised us it is the coming of Mashiach. So a big shout out to Rabbi Mendel Kalmenson from Central London.
Let me jump back in for a second and say that you guys are so blessed on this chat, on this wonderful gathering, to have your personal shliach and shlucha. Obviously, Rabbi Pinny and Rabbi Zalman, but I see some other shluchim. Take advantage of this awesome opportunity and gift of a real live couple who embody the teachings that I hoped to encapsulate in the book. And I want to say something that I think is worth saying. Very often Chabad is associated over the years with different positive accolades, much deserved. For example, inclusive, 100% true. For example, non-judgmental, 100% true. Relevant, 100% true. Family-oriented, 100% true. There's one accolade that we don't even articulate, but is so true, and I think it's important to highlight it, and that is joyful, positive, optimistic. When a person goes into a Chabad house, they very often leave one step more uplifted. There's a spring to their way. There's a whole change in their approach. That, dear friends, is the embodiment of the teachings of the Rebbe, who himself would often say were the embodiment and elucidation of the teachings of his Rebbeim, of the Chabad Rebbeim, going back to the Alter Rebbe and before to the Baal Shem Tov. So take advantage of the unique opportunity you have. Hashem has blessed us all by way of the Rebbe's mission to benefit from a unique regiment of courageous, optimistic, and empowering ambassadors for Judaism called Shluchim and Shluchais. Take advantage, pick up the phone, send an email or a text to your Shliach or Shlucha, and encourage, ask them what learning opportunities are available to grow from strength to strength by internalizing, absorbing the teachings of Chassidus.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Kalmenson. First of all, once again, to help sponsor tonight's event and hopefully help us continue offering these classes, go to Chabad, swb.com/donate or Chabad of Tallahassee. What was it? I don't remember. It doesn't matter. It's all going to the same. It's to help support these wonderful lectures. I don't know where he is, but he Chabad of Tallahassee something.
All right.
So I want to give what?
Your website is just as good.
Okay, yeah.
It's easier.
Yes, ChabadSWB.com/donate. Help us sponsor. I want to give a shout out to Rabbi Koppel Silverberg and his community in Tamarack, Rabbi Shimon Andrusier in the community of Century Village in Pembroke Pines, Rabbi Michal Rosenblum, I see, is on with his community, Rabbi Muchkin. There's a lot of rabbis and communities. We welcome all of you, and we hope you'll continue to participate in these wonderful lectures. We have many more coming. Chabad of North Shore is here. Chabad of Northwestern is here. We have throughout Florida, we have many, many rabbis and from all over the world. I saw rabbis and community members. So welcome all, and we wish you a good Yom Tov. I'm actually going to, I don't know if we're going to stop this chat, but I encourage this tonight, tomorrow is a very, very special holiday, Yutas Kislev. Again, this is a very pivotal day in Judaism. If not for the first Chabad Rebbe being freed after the persecution and the rest and the charges that he was facing for spreading Judaism, for spreading Chassidus, for spreading the mystical teachings of the Torah, Judaism would have had a whole different face. Who knows if it would have even survived without the resilience of the Rebbe and all the Chabad Rebbes who followed, who were even imprisoned for just spreading Judaism, teaching Torah. And we know the Rebbe himself in our time, in the darkest time of the former Soviet Union under Tsarist Russia, communism, the Rebbe had the previous Rebbe and the Rebbe had a whole underground of providing schools and minyans and building mikvahs. And this was all because it started from this day, this pivotal day of the 19th of Kislev. So first of all, I definitely thank everyone for joining us tonight, but I hope, and I'll put now on the chat, one other Farbringen that's going on that you could tune in afterwards. There's one from Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson. I know he's talking tonight. I'm going to add that right now. I see the Shul of Bal Harbor is having Rabbi Shem Tov. I'll put that link on. There's so many. There's one that I'm going to go to after this is over in Hollywood. Rabbi Manis Friedman is speaking. This next one that I just posted is Rabbi Shem Tov. And there's so many things that you could join. We hope that you will make sure to fill this day, tonight and tomorrow, the day that he was actually redeemed, liberated. I hope you will fill the day with learning more Torah, mitzvahs, more about Chabad, and hopefully be inspired to truly take that joy and positivity and everything that we spoke about tonight to take your own commitment to the next level, and God will inspire those around you. Rabbi,
there was a donation made in honor of Rabbi Rosenfeld in Aventura. So I just want to mention that. Also want to mention a website, a very good website to learn Tanya, because a lot of the teachings and the things that Rabbi Kalmenson was talking about today in positivity is discussed in Tanya, especially chapter 26th and 27th. I'll be happy. So the website called TanyaClass.com. Wonderful Tanya classes by Rabbi Kanziansky out of Manhattan. Again, TanyaClass.com. Really good website to listen to Tanya. You can choose whatever chapters you want to listen to. So very highly recommended.
Also, Rabbi Oirechman, the Chayenu has now a new app, and I highly recommend. I don't know if everybody knows about Chayenu, but it's an English, Hebrew. Every single week it gives you a quota, and it touches on Torah, the Torah portion of the week, Tanya, Maimonides, stories in the back, little nuggets for every single day. And now, especially with Tanya, you could do it on an app. You could do it from the book. You know, I don't leave home without it. My American Express, I a lot of times forget at home, you know, but my Chayenu, I never leave home without it. So go to Chayenu and that's what this night is all about, to inspire you to take on new commitments, make a resolution to study, especially Tanya. Let me tell you, so many people will tell you that Tanya has been really the key to getting in touch with their own soul and connecting it to godliness. That's what today is all about. And I hope everybody is inspired enough to study more and go to Chabad.org. There's so many articles, so many resources today for everyone to be able to stay more connected to your rabbis through Zoom. You know, until God willing, we'll be able to come back in person. Harriet, you better come next year, Rosh Hashanah. I gave you that shout out for that reason. But there's so many things that we can do to do our part to make the world a little brighter. We're coming soon to the holiday of Hanukkah, which every single night we light another candle. The idea is that we cannot stand still. We can't stay idle. We can't think that we've done enough. We got to do it. We got to do more and more to brighten up the world with goodness. And hopefully it will lead to the ultimate lighting, the kindling of the menorah, not only in our backyards, on our front porches, hopefully the ultimate menorah in the third and final holy temple with the coming of Mashiach.